Thank you. Can you guys hear me? All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about something completely different than everybody else. I'm going to talk about Wasp biocontrol. This is a project funded by the MPI's Sustainable Farming Fund, and I'm looking at potential biocontrol agents to control wasps. So I just kind of wanted to go through the process of how I go about starting the whole process. So the first thing we need to do is figure out where the wasps come from, and we figured out that the common and the German wasp both come from a pretty specific place in the southern part of the UK. So the next stage from that, so we've got the target where to look, so now we need to figure out what to look for. And so this is basically a literature review and look at what people have found in the nests over the years. And luckily, the UK has a very long history of natural history, funnily enough. And so they've got records of the ranges and what species and the phenologies of these things. So it's pretty lucky that actually these wasps come from the UK because it's such a great resource. And I'll talk more about three of the agents that I came up with this pretty quickly from this literature review. And then the last thing that before we get too deep into this, we have to go over there to see what is there ourselves. So just because historically these things have been documented in the nests, I have to go there and look, collect them, and learn some of the biology. And this can be problematic in the UK because wasps aren't a problem there. So they've got a completely different outlook on wasps. People are like, oh, what the hell do you want to dig these wasps up for? They're not a problem here. And once you finally explain that, well, they're a problem where I'm from, so yeah. But on any of the public land, any of the national parks, they have a lot of regulations, and these permitting scenarios you have to apply like over a year in advance to get permission to dig in these areas. So what I've done is I've got into the National Trust, and so what they just let me know whenever they come across a problem nest when I'm over there. And that's what we're doing here. This is a National Trust site from the 16th century, and I'm excavating, I say excavating, I'm pulling these roof tiles off of a house from the 1500s, 30 feet up in the air. So they were re-roofing it, and they found the wasp nest, and they weren't very pleased about that. So when I was doing the literature reviews, one of the first organisms that I came up as a potential agent was Volucella inanus. First of all, because it's got an excellent range map with where the wasps come from, and they're a brood parasite. So they feed on the larvae and the pupae of the wasps in the nest. But it's not specific to just the Vespula vulgaris or Vespula germanica that we have here. They're on any cavity nesting wasp. So there's several species of Vespula in the UK, and then there's also the cavity nesting hornets, the European hornet, that if that ever came over here, these guys would be a potential preemptive biocontrol. And these were found in probably about 75% of the nests that I've dug up over the past couple years. And so that ranges from severely infested to just one or two in each nest. Being hoverflies, they're excellent flyers. So if they get all the way through the process, they should disperse pretty rapidly. So this is a nest that I dug up last year out of an old tree. And I don't know if you guys can make it out. There's a lot of the Volucella eggs just on the outside, so they would come into the entrance, the female would come into the entrance hole, and she would just crawl to the outside of the nest paper and lay her eggs. Those would hatch into these little larvae that their doors eventually flatten so that they can fit into the cells. And then they begin to feed from the wasp larvae. And here's a video of, so these flattened larvae are the Volucella. These are the second instars, so they're a lot larger and they're easier to see. But they'll go in there, their doors eventually flatten so they can fit between the wasp larva and the cell. And then they burrow their way down and they start to feed from underneath. And then, yeah, they don't feed on just one wasp like most parasitoids do. They feed on multiple. A sister species, Volucella zenaria, this was also an excellent range match. But the literature is conflicting on their life histories. Most of the literature says that they are scavengers and what's called a facultative predator, but that's not really what I saw. I saw them basically being predators and facultative scavengers when I was over there. They're also potentially migratory, so that means that they would also be quick to spread their range, and if ever released in New Zealand. I didn't find these in 2016, but I found quite a few of them last year. Number 3 is a really cool beetle called the Medoecus paradoxus. It's also called the wasp nest beetle. These are brood parasites, parasitoids actually. So these will only feed on one larva or prepupa at a time. So these have a really cool biology where the females in the autumn, they will go to a tree where Vespula go to forage for pulp to make their nest, because the nests are made out of wood pulp. And she'll lay the eggs there, they'll overwinter. It's still not quite known if the eggs overwinter or if the larvae overwinter. And then in the spring, early summer, then the wasp foragers go there to collect their wood to make their nest. And these larvae hop on the back of the wasp worker, take a ride back to the nest, hop off, and then they become internal parasites of the wasp larvae, and then they pop out, and then they start eating from the bottom. That's really cool. So here's a normal wasp pupa, actually. And here's one, this is a Medoecus larva, and this is it feeding on so that's what it should look like. This is the wasp larva now that's been kind of exsanguinated, basically. And so these are really cool, but they are only kind of going to do a 1-for-1, whereas the two Volucella can do multiples. So to wrap up here, I'm heading back to the UK in less than a month's time to do more of the testing. So there's still a lot to learn on these 3 species. Basic biology, how much damage, can we quantify how much damage these do to the wasp nest? Things like diapause duration and what do the adults need for food, because we know being hoverflies, they'll need pollen and they'll need nectar. I'll also be doing host testing on bumblebees and honeybees, of course. I was planning to talk a bit more about that, but due to the time constraints, I can't. And then apply to the EPA eventually before the end of the project, which is 2020. And yeah, thank you.